Hello and welcome to Business Sense. I'm Ralph Rivas. For today's episode, we're talking about esports, NFTs, Web 3.0, and all the other topics in between. Now, for this episode, we invited Nexplay President Miguel Bernas. Nexplay, of course, is an esports ecosystem and technology startup founded by Filipinos. Miguel, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here on Rappler. Thank you.
And congratulations on being appointed as the president of Nextplay. Now, tell us a little about the company, what it does, and tell us, kumusta ang esports amid this pandemic?
So Nexplay is we call ourselves an esports ecosystem company. What that means in a nutshell is that we basically bring together technology, esports teams, gamer KOLs, brands, and connect them all together with really passionate audiences. Which is what we have, because obviously there's a lot of passion and enthusiasm for gaming. The company has been around since 2018. That's also how long I've been involved with the company, although I just recently took a more active leadership role within the company. There's a bit of a backstory there. So back in, I guess it must have been 2017 or so, I was working with a media company here in Singapore, where I'm based, called MediaCorp. That's one of the bigger sort of television and media networks. We had a program where we would, look at different startups to invest in. And it was one of those days where we must have gone through about 40 startups or something in one day. Um, and one of the guys who walked in is this guy named Gabriel Benito, who is of course now my co-founder and partner in crime. And he had pretty much nothing more than a kind of a crude prototype and a prayer and a lot of enthusiasm. And he really stuck out to me because we didn't get a lot of Filipino entrepreneurs at the time. So I found what he was doing really interesting, also because it was all about games and streaming games, etc. And being a longtime gamer myself, it was something that really kind of caught my attention. And I remember talking to him afterwards. MediaCorp did not end up taking an investment in the company for whatever reason. And I remember talking to Gabriel afterwards and said, "Hey, man, when you're ready to raise more money, let me know. Let's see how I can help you." I ended up becoming one of the early investors, and basically have been watching this company grow. And I got to pay tribute to Gab and the team a little bit, because they have done a marvelous job. Really growing this company and growing this community to where we are today. I think we're at a really great place in terms of the industries we're in, because we are at the nexus of two extremely fast growing and very exciting industries. One is gaming and esports, and then the other is the area which we have very high ambitions in, and that's blockchain technology and how blockchain technology is going to affect gaming. I think blockchain gaming represents a really interesting inflection point for the gaming industry as a whole. And for somebody like myself who has been uh, playing games and being sort of in the game industry and the digital media industry as a whole for a very long time, it really feels like this is a very interesting point in the industry, as it shifts from its current business model to a completely new business model. And that's why we're very excited. So all that being said, we're very early days in terms of blockchain technology, but also just in terms of Web 3.0, and what people are excitedly referring to as the metaverse. But I think Nextplay is extremely well placed to be one of the companies that will chart the future of that industry.
Yeah, actually, it says here in your latest press release, Nextplay is well to close to its fundraising, moving towards its Series A investment round. I know details are pretty scarce, but if you can give us a little hint, what's that about?
Well, so first of all, we've already established a pretty large network with Nexplay. For those of you who are in the business, who are at least following games and following the game industry, you might know that we have, some of the biggest names and biggest teams in the industry. Our teams are sort of in the top three or top one in the Philippines, but also in the top three, within the region. So very, very, quite a large enthusiastic community. We have lots of, goodwill around the personalities that are involved with Nextplay, and also around the Nextplay brand itself. We've so far raised already about $2 million. And it's very exciting, especially because we're at a point now where we work with, teams and influencers that have a cumulative reach of about 200 million followers. If you add all of their follower numbers up across multiple platforms, we have the capability to reach as many as 800 million people in terms of cumulative reach on a monthly basis. And as you mentioned, yes, we are about to start our Series A round. We're going into it with with a lot of strengths. A lot of those numbers in terms of audience size, our network, as I talked about earlier. But also, we're going in very strong in the sense that we're now operationally profitable. We've got a comfortable amount of money in the bank, but we really, really want to be able to raise this new round so that we can really go into all of these new areas, which I think are the really, really the more exciting parts of the gaming industry today.
Mm. Now, speaking of the gaming industry, what about the impact of the pandemic? Did it do more harm or more good?
So I think in general, the way the pandemic has affected industries is that it has basically accelerated whatever trends were all happening beforehand, right? So if you think about it, whether it's the e-commerce industry or the way we work, etc., it really accelerated the growth of all of these trends. So if people were already starting to buy more and more items online, that that pace accelerated even more. Now, that means that it's the same. You can expect the same trend within the gaming industry. So again, consumer behaviors that were already trending just accelerated at a faster pace. Now, in a gaming context, if you look at figures in the US, and I'm citing a research here from Morgan Stanley, the gaming industry grew in 1 year in 2020 the equivalent of 4 years of growth. So that's the kind of growth that we saw. And if you think about your own digital media consumption as a consumer, whether that's you're watching more Netflix, or you're watching more YouTube, or you're watching more of this and that, it really kind of makes sense, right? It starts to become obvious that most people are picking up their mobile devices and spending more time at their PCs playing games, and discovering new games. And when they say that in the US it grew the equivalent of 4 years worth of growth, that basically means that the game industry added another 50 million gamers um, over the course of over just the first year of the pandemic. Now, naturally, as you can imagine, a lot of research in this area is a little bit US centric. It's not quite so easy to find similar figures that represent Asia. But I think it's safe to say that, because just an indication of our own business in terms of how much we've grown year on year, it really does reflect the popularity of gaming, the popularity of esports in general. And, the other interesting dimension also is that, unfortunately, some of the effects of the pandemic are also economic. That means in some places, people have lost income, people have, lost jobs as well. And that also means people have picked up gaming as a, just because of the whole thing of just trying to find more activity. But I think, again, this comes back to what I was saying in terms of blockchain technology and how that's going to affect gaming. It's created a whole new interesting aspect of gaming because you now have something that the industry refers to as play to earn, which is an ability for a gamer to be able to actually earn money or earn cash through playing games. And that's an interesting trend, which I think, especially in the Philippines, has been, has seen quite a bit of growth in the last couple of years.
Yeah, actually, it's quite a lucrative industry at this point, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with the joke na parang, ayan, kaka-computer mo. Di ba? So, parang actually now sa kaka-computer mo, you can actually earn, I don't know, thousands or even millions at this point. Now, my
I, you
next
know,
question,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
my, yep, my next question is actually, what does it take to be a good gamer? How does one get in to the whole ecosystem? And ano bang requirements? I don't know, anong qualifications to be in one of your teams?
Well, look, let's step a bit back also, because I mean, I have really seen the game industry evolve over the last few decades. I'm old enough to still remember when video games were played in arcades, and I remember the transition from arcades into the home through PCs. Console, the early days of console gaming. I remember we owned an Atari, one of those black and white 8-bit Atari players,
Mm,
Atari consoles at home. I also remember the Nintendo Family Computer. And over the years, I've played on Xbox, I've played on PC, and all kinds of other things. So it's also been, it's just interesting to see how everything has evolved. Obviously, it's moved on to mobile, and obviously, it's moved from offline to online. And really, it's just fascinating to see how much the industry has changed just within the last few decades. Now, there's a lot of things obviously that goes into becoming a really, really good team. The first thing, of course, is that you have to be super passionate, because it takes literally hours and hours and hours of really, really getting good at the game. If you have aspirations of becoming a team, and if you have aspirations of forming a team, or getting noticed, or being represented by somebody like Nexplay, there's a couple of things which I would suggest. The first thing is to specialize, and that's really just pick a popular game that you really, really want to get really, really good at. And I think it's better to specialize. Find people like yourself, that's passionate and interested in the same game, and learn how to get really, really, really good at it before you spread yourself too thin and start kind of looking at multiple titles for your team, etc. So, for example, in the case of Nextplay, Mobile Legends is one of the big ones, um, and so really kind of specialize. The second thing is that you should think about your team as a brand, right? In the same way that the big brand names treat themselves, and that means your team has to be clearly differentiated, in terms of brand. How you kind of look at brands, right? Brands are usually clearly differentiated from one another. That means in terms of values, in terms of personalities. That's why branding. That's why things like uniforms are such a big part of all of this. It also means you have to have a good online presence, like your website, etc. And that means that it's easy for people to find you in terms of your channels, whether that's Facebook pages, YouTube pages, etc. And then finally, when you think you're ready, and is to seek representation, right? And that's where a company like Nextplay comes in, because this is what we're good at. This is how we do, right? We make superstars out of these teams. It means that we can also act on your behalf in terms of finding sponsors, and really kind of help with the amplification, and making sure that you get the kind of recognition as a team that you deserve.
mm. Nako, thanks so much for the tips. Baka maengganyo ako diyan. I might
Why not?
I
Why not,
might
Ralph?
replay again. Actually, I'm a fan of Mobile Legends. Actually, my mains are Kagura and sometimes Fanny, yung mga characters na gusto ko. But yeah, really lots of growth for that game, and other games as well. I guess people are really looking for dual purpose. Na it's not just all games. You need to benefit from it as well. But now, I also want to talk about the other plans of Nextplay. It says here in your latest press release that you plan to venture into high growth areas of Web 3.0, NFTs, and blockchain gaming. Now, tell us more about that.
Well, Web 3.0 is really just kind of that's kind of just the I guess the blanket term for a more decentralized internet, right? In a nutshell, it kind of means that you have interoperability between platforms. It also means that there is a stronger ability for individuals to become creators, and allow creators to monetize their own content more directly, and have direct relationships with fans. And this is kind of different from the previous approach of where, especially when if you're a content creator, like whether that's a musician or a filmmaker, etc. It's kind of like the publishers that tended to make the most amount of money. In this kind of an environment, there is a greater potential for individuals to kind of not only create their own value, but also make the most money out of the value that they're creating, and also retain all of that ownership. And that's, a lot of that is going to be enabled by blockchain technology. And you mentioned NFTs. NFTs is one of the cornerstone technologies that come with all of that. Now, it's already interesting that when it comes to things like blockchain and crypto, that there already is today a lot of early indication of popularity and adoption here in Asia, in the Philippines in particular. So, for example, just when it comes to crypto or crypto wallets, one of the more popular crypto wallets is MetaMask. And there are, as far as I know, that there are more MetaMask accounts coming from the Philippines than any other country. And also, we've talked about it a little bit. There's also play to earn, right? Which is a really a growing trend embraced by Filipinos. One of the biggest companies in the space, YGG, is a Filipino startup. And so there's really a lot of indication that this is all kind of set to grow. Now, all of that being said, we're still in very early days when it comes to this technology. So we have a lot of plans and a lot of ambitions. Not everything I can detail for you right now. But it really goes to show you that because there's so much growth in the area and a lot of enthusiasm and obviously a lot of investment money going in, there's really a lot of potential for this to grow. And I think Nexplay is in a very good position to be one of the companies that defines, what uh, the metaverse or Web 3.0 will look like when it comes to a gaming perspective, because of all of these things we have going for our company.
Mm. Now, Miguel, let me challenge you a little about these so-called buzzwords, if you may call it. No, blockchain, I understand, kasi blockchain is already being used by some of the banks here in the Philippines, actually, and I see the purpose. Pero
Right.
NFTs, medyo, I don't know, I'm still on the fence on that one, kasi some experts are just saying that NFTs are basically making scarcity out of something that's not supposed to be scarce, or parang it's a
Hmm.
fabricated. It's a what's the right term for it? Parang it shouldn't be scarce in the first place. Images, things like that. Um, there was also backlash, as a matter of fact, when Twitter started to launch this profile photos, NFT profile photos. Na parang pwede mo namang i-right click yan and everybody gets a copy, things like that. So, what makes you a believer on these NFTs?
So first of all, I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how NFTs are being applied. And I think the most visible things are the things you said. It's things like, people sort of look at it and say, ano ba yan? Animated GIF lang yan. Why is it so valuable? Or it's just a little bit of code or whatever. It's just a little piece of art. But first of all, there's a couple of things to say about that. One is, first and foremost, just because you or somebody like you, or just because as a person you think that has no value for me, it doesn't mean that it has no value for other people. NFT is just an asset class, and it's a new kind of asset class. And if I think about other existing asset classes that have been around for a long time, um, there are a lot of people who sort of look at a painting and think, why the hell would anybody pay so much money for that painting? And yet for somebody who's really into that artist, or really digs that kind of style, they're willing to pay whatever for that. One of my hobbies, for example, is watch collecting. Why would somebody pay $100 million for a Rolex Daytona, just because it was worn by Paul Newman? For most people, they're like, it blows their mind to think, oh, what value could that possibly have for everybody? But again, for collectors, this has huge value for them, right? So I think that's sort of the one way to frame it, right? It's an asset class, and therefore, you may not understand the asset class today, but that doesn't completely negate the value of that asset class, because there are people that will see value in it. But the second thing also is that, because I think what you're seeing, artwork, gifts, etc., this is currently the most visible application of NFTs. It's really just the tip of the iceberg, and we're really, really in early days for what are the possible applications and utilities for NFTs. An NFT is nothing more than just a digital unique item, right? It's something that represents something that's unique. Non-fungible simply means that it can't be replicated. So that means when an NFT is unique, that means it will always be unique forever and ever, right? And so if you think about it, there are lots of other applications that are being discussed today, or just starting to be discussed today, that we haven't seen yet. So, for example, I was just listening to this the other day, on a podcast. They were talking about how NFTs could potentially be used as replacements for uh, you know, le- uh, for passports, right? Because after all, if it is a digital unique item, it could easily represent you as a person in the same way that a biometric passport could, right? So there is technology applications in there that's already being discussed, that are kind of, for anybody that kind of looks a little bit deeper into what NFTs could potentially stand for. There's all kinds of applications which we're only just thinking about today. Now, try to imagine that in a gaming context, right? In a gaming context, how do you then see the utility for things like NFTs? Well, it's not just it's not just trivial things like animated gifs, or unique pieces of art, but it could also represent things like unique items, or unique properties within games. And this is where the metaverse stuff starts to get really exciting, because if you think about the future of Web 3.0, when you think about how people are going to be living in virtual worlds as much as they are living in today's physical world, then the idea of unique ownership starts to when you start to think that through, all of these other applications start to come out. Now, why am I particularly excited when it comes to gaming? Well, I think the gaming industry in general is always at the cutting edge of technology, especially when it has to do with anything in digital media. And gamers are usually some of the early adopters, right? If you want to try and predict what future behaviors in digital media are going to look like, or digital entertainment is going to look like, it's always a good idea to look at what gamers are doing and how the game industry is doing, because chances are what the gaming industry is experimenting with today is going to be the norms for tomorrow. So that's why always an interesting thing to watch. Actually, there's two sort of trend setting industries in entertainment. One is gaming, and the other is porn. But we won't talk about the other one.
Yeah, I've read about that.
So that's why that's why we're very excited, right? Because gamers are generally the early adopters, and I think we're only just scratching the surface when it comes to the true potential of NFTs and other blockchain technologies. But we will see it in the gaming industry first.
Mhm. Now, let's talk about the metaverse. Any any projections or wish list that you want to see in the metaverse? Kung kailan man dadating ito? I mean, it's already there, but not a lot of people is in the metaverse at this point. So, what do you want to see in the metaverse?
Well, I think there's a couple of misconceptions also about metaverse, and some when metaverse and Web 3.0 are often used kind of interchangeably. And I think one of the first impressions is that when they say metaverse, it's all about kind of virtual reality and people wearing goofy looking headsets and stuff like that. partially because Mr. Mark Zuckerberg talks about it that way, and also because we've seen it in movies like Ready Player One, and or even The Matrix, or stuff like that. What I really want to see, or what I'm really looking forward to, is maybe less about the 3D or virtual environments, but more about the interoperability, and the fact that multiple platforms can move back and forth, and the fact that items can move from one platform to another, or one game environment to another. And that's one of the things that I want to that I'd really kind of look forward to, and something that we're talking about at Nexplay. And again, some of the things that we're trying to figure out, how can we make these things reality. One of the things I would like to see is that if you're a gamer right now, that every time you play an online game, you have a different avatar, you have a different sometimes you have a different handle, you have to memorize a different sets of passwords as you move from one game to the other. And similar to my sort of passport example, there should be a case where you just have one ID, and that's used across multiple games, right? That's really something I'd like to be able to see in the future. And the other thing, which also eludes a lot of gamers right now, is you could be playing an online game for a very, very long time, but because either the development of that game has already started to wane, and there's interest moving on to other games. I used to play a game called City of Heroes, and I spent years playing, developing characters, power sets, making friends within City of Heroes. But then the game folded, and then you kind of like, as you're trying to discover the next MMORPG or online game you want to play, and I'm like, wow, I all of that time that I invested in that game, like none of it gets ported out. And I'd like to see a gaming future where all of that time you invested can be transplanted or exported out into another game, or just carried over seamlessly into another game. And I think these are the kinds of things that NFTs can enable, right? The idea that maybe just because this game no longer exists, that magic sword that you spent hours and hours and hours to try and acquire and have been using, it's gone forever. Well, there should be a way for you to port that over. Maybe not exactly the same magic sword, but there'll be an equivalent item in this new game that you're playing. And that's really something I'd like to be able to take going forward. It would also make trading items between users so much more easier, especially if you could now do it in this kind of cross platform or interoperable kind of gaming ecosystem in the future.
Mm. And another concern actually in the gaming industry, hacking. It's really disappointing when your account gets hacked and all the items that you invested in gets lost because of hacking. So how do you think NFTs and the blockchain will fix that?
Well, I mean, again, when it comes to NFTs, it's a unique item. They're not easy to replicate. There are ways in which it can be identified to you personally. Now, of course, if you accidentally disclose your passwords, or accidentally disclose your code phrases, then obviously it's really hard to recover. The ironic thing, I think, when it comes to cybersecurity in general, is that you can have the best tech in the world, but it's almost always humans at fault when it comes to security breaches and things like that. Um, you know, a lot of stuff gets lost for just simple things like phishing, right? Phishing scams. That's not the fault of the technology. That's just the fault of somebody being careless, right? Or somebody not thinking
Mm.
through what they're able to share. So I guess I'm trying to say that there's no completely foolproof kind of system, but certainly there are a lot of things inherent to the technology that make it much more secure compared to others.
Mm. So yeah, lots of exciting opportunities in the esports space. Still a little skeptical on some issues, but really looking forward to
How can I
hear from
convince you,
you a
Ralph?
bit. I'll read about it more. I appreciate lots of the concepts already. Yeah, just I'm just here really looking forward on how everything will pan out. right. And on that note, thanks so much for joining us, Miguel Bernas, Nexplay president, newly appointed president. So congratulations again for getting that role. And I'm Ralph Rivas. This has been another episode of Business Sense. Thanks for watching.